Malcolm, though, you don't necessarily believe there is a difference between Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd on Libya?
Look, it's a fine line, and you can leap one side or the other however much you like. But I would argue that essentially they were as one on the no-fly zone. It's something that had to be... they had to get it through various international councils and forums, but essentially they were saying the same thing. But you could then argue that Rudd was perhaps being more emphatic than Gillard in wanting this. You could also argue that perhaps Gillard had been duchessed a bit by her meeting after her meeting with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, but Kevin Rudd didn't have the benefit of what the Americans are actually thinking on this.
Quite true, and the Prime Minister did. But in a technical sense, they were still saying the same thing. But it's just that, as the Bolter said, there's a certain disconnect between the two of them now that any vague difference of nuance becomes a chasm.
Yeah, I thought there was an interesting quote from one of a US official was quoted as saying too, is that Kevin Rudd's idea? Well, what resources is he offering in terms of maintaining this no-fly zone?
She did appear to step back, though, when she was overseas. She did appear to step back from the emphatic statements that had been made prior to, and certainly from Kevin Rudd's emphatic statements.
And for good reason. If the country that you're asking to execute it is not interested, then drop it.
But the thing is, look, the difference is actually profound in terms of emphasis. Kevin Rudd was going around giving interviews saying we cannot have another Guernica, the bombing of this Spanish city by in the Spanish Civil War. We cannot have that. We've got to have a no-fly zone. I'm lobbying everyone. Gillard saying it's one of a range of options. We're not really. There is a huge difference. And the thing is, to compound that, is the briefing that people close to her are giving journalists about him being
And let's say all of this played out, of course, at a news conference in New York with the Prime Minister. There it is.
These things are completely in accord with each other. I don't want to narrow any options.
But he does.
Well, I don't want to narrow any options. I don't accept your characterisation.
Mr Rudd tweeted less than 24 hours ago, working with other countries on no-fly zone to stop Gaddafi's war plans. Mr Rudd is a member of your cabinet. He's not a freedom fighter or a citizen in a demonstration. Surely he should not be going out making these comments to the world at large on a policy issue such as that.
Well, look, I think let's be a bit fair here. I've just explained the merits of tweeting. One of the great limitations of tweeting is the limit to those number of characters. So in terms of assessing Mr Rudd's position, I think it would be fair to look at all of his statements and fair to look at all of his statements involving consideration by the UN Security Council.
Well, Graham Richardson, who's been around a while, had this to say on Sky News.
I think he's been going rogue ever since he lost his job. Rudd is regularly in private conversation with journalists, bagging her constantly. It just never stops. But the question I think should be asked is, what the hell is an Australian foreign minister doing running around the Middle East and Europe for a couple of weeks trying to organise a no-fly zone in Libya? Since when did that become some integral part of Australia's strategic foreign policy?
Well, unless you count getting a seat in the Security Council an integral part of Australia's foreign policy, which I think a lot of Kevin Rudd's colleagues believe that's what he's on about.
Getting himself in the UN is probably closer to the truth. But listen, this actually has turned out to be a disaster for Julia Gillard, her whole trip to Washington, except, the speech will make friends, in one sense, will prove that she's well disposed. But what are the overwhelming messages? She goes to America. She's not in control of the foreign policy. She's being asked about the foreign minister setting a completely different foreign policy. I mean, that's fundamentally it. She's come across as weak and someone who isn't in control even of her own government. And the other thing I want to ask is this, Barry. The other image of her being so addicted to spin and so trivial, essentially trivial. You were with Bob Hawke. Is there any way on this earth that Bob Hawke would go into the White House on an official visit as Prime Minister and pose kicking a footy around the Oval Office?
He might have been inclined to do it.
Is there any way that he would have done it?
Look, I think that would have gone over well in the Aussie real estates.
Is there any way? I'll keep asking. Would Menzies have done it? Would Menzies have done it? Would Keating have done it?
Probably not.
Would serious people have done it?
Hang on, Menzies wouldn't have worn a two-piece suit. I mean, let's get a bit real.
I want to ask the bottom line question. This is a stunt for
It was a good
an FM
stunt.
audience.
It was
it's
a good stunt.
joke, and it brands her as trivial.
Terrific photo.